Hi, everybody, and welcome to Fire Engineering's Humpday Hangout and to our show, The Issues and Challenges in Today's Fire Service. I'm Chief Rick Lasky, along with my co-host, my very good friend and Humpday Hangout partner, Assistant Chief Terry McGrath from the Lewisville, Texas Fire Department. We've got a great show lined up for you today. As a reminder, we always tell you this, if you have any questions, jump on Twitter and send them our way. Just make sure you add hashtag FE Talk, Frank Edward Talk for Fire Engineering Talk. Today, Terry and I are hanging out with two great fire service leaders. We talk about impact, we talk about careers, we talk about making a difference on this show all the time. And these two gentlemen are examples of exactly that. They define the word when it comes to impact, especially in the fire service. But we've got Kelly Kistner, the fire marshal with the San Marcos Texas Fire Department, beautiful down there in San Marcos. And then Chief Randy McGregor for the Bryan, Texas Fire Department. Welcome, brothers. Welcome, Terry.
Chief, good to see you.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Kelly, do us.
Thank you, Chief.
We're going to walk through this just so we can, for our viewers, so they get to know you a little bit better. And we'll jump in there with Kelly. Kelly first. Kelly, give our viewers a little background on yourself, your fire service career, and how you ended up working for a great boss down there. Chief Les Stevens, a great guy.
I started in '92 in the fire service and spent some time actually in a 911 dispatch center and worked some law enforcement. Been involved in volunteer and the paid service. Been in the fire marshal business now at the city, county, and at the state level, and had done my time and had a very good experience at the state fire marshal's office in Texas. And a couple months ago, I was enjoying life when Chief Stevens called and was looking for a fire marshal. And here we are enjoying life again with a great fire chief and a great fire department.
Isn't it? Hey, you know how people cherry pick. I'm telling you, good bosses know how to cherry pick. It's easy to do great things with great people. So, well, congratulations on that, because I know he's excited about it, and so are the people down there. And they snagged another great one, and you got a great boss to work for. So, congratulations, buddy.
Thank you, Chief.
That's awesome. So, Chief, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I guess my question I always ask when I get to a fire chief, and especially with folks with us having Chief McGregor here from Bryan, Texas, is Randy, how did you get into fire service? Kind of walk us through that. I'm always curious when I meet bosses like yourself, how they end up into the big chair. Now that I'm sure you're going through therapy and all kinds of things, because being a fire chief, you have to do that kind of stuff. But
right. Well, like many, I was influenced at an early age. My father was a volunteer firefighter. I was born in Baytown, Texas, and grew up there the first few years of my life, and just caught an interest in it. I started out in the volunteer fire service in the early 80s, and I decided to pursue that as a career. And in 1983, I had the opportunity and the blessing to obtain employment with the Bryan Fire Department, and I've been there ever since. Just have kind of worked my way up through the ranks. I've been very fortunate to be around some very good leaders that's influenced my career, and have come up and sit where I am today.
Well, and I don't think you can talk about, and it's a great university facility, Texas A&M and TEACS, and all the training that goes on there without mentioning Bryan, Texas. I mean, it's kind of, that's what you hear anytime you talk about that. And what's kind of ironic, a lot of places I travel to, Chief, where there's a facility in a college and a university and a training facility like that, sometimes the departments around it don't take advantage of it, and sometimes they may not even have that good of a reputation. On the other hand, you guys have always had an awesome reputation as a progressive fire department. I've always said it, Terry will jump in there with this. We've always talked about Lewisville, Texas being a very progressive fire department full of tradition. We don't throw away the traditions of why people get in and the selflessness, those that dedicate their lives to one of selflessness and the love for the job, and the ceremonial stuff that makes it so special. But at the same time, through the programs, through everything else, and how we operate, staying progressive. And hats off to you, Chief, because you guys have done a great job with that.
Well, I appreciate that. We're very fortunate to be sitting here next to TEACS, and we try to get out there as much as we can. There's some great people there, and we are very blessed to be sitting here just next door and have the ability to take advantage.
Well, and for our viewers, and I kind of mentioned this to a few of you that I talked to yesterday, having our two special guests on today, Chief McGrath, having been in law enforcement for forever, and an arson investigator, and ATF dude with his mom dog all those years, and that investigative nature. Both of us are always looking at the hows and whys of things that happen in the fire service. Sometimes those horrible things, such as a line of duty death, and then how do you work your way out of that? That I've been a big one on. What do we have to learn? I guess my frustration is, if you want to see how the next firefighter is going to die in another state or wherever, you just got to look at the past 10 years, because it's the same stuff over and over again. And I've said for years, if we're corporate America, they put us in jail because we unlike Chief, what you did, and Bryan, and what you do, and Kelly, what you've done over the years, in my travels, I wish more regions took the initiative the way you two gentlemen have to make a difference, not sweeping anything underneath the carpet, whether it's things from an investigation or things with your own department. I know one department, I knew 3 people personally, 2 different incidents, and you had to guilt them to even put these people's pictures on the walls, let alone remember them, let alone learn anything from the incident or from anyone's incident. I've grown to be outspoken over the years about that, because I think firefighters are way too precious and way too special. If we do lose one, I don't care how Patty Brown, a legendary Patty Brown in FDNY, used to say, I don't care how safe you are. This is still a dangerous job. It still is a dangerous job. And we don't shut our doors. We don't stop what we're doing. Chief, Bryan is not immune to heartbreak. I believe in, was it August of '78, Richard Lopez, an operator, was lost in the line of duty, searching for a missing occupant. I saw that at your memorial page. And then back February 16th, 2013, our hearts broke with an incident that you had right there in Bryan. I know I was working hard to make sure we recognized Lieutenant, forgive me, because being from Chicago, I screw up names all the time. Is it Picard or how would?
It's pronounced Pickard.
Pickard. Okay, that's why. Because Steve Bass, my good buddy Steve Bass, so Pickard, to make sure that he and I know his widow representative was, and I know you were instrumental in making sure that he received the Chief Ray Downey Courage and Valor Award at FDIC. I know I called Bobby Halt right away and said I can't think of a better example of what it means and what it takes to receive something dedicated to such an incredible individual. The definition of selflessness was there. I guess the question is, 2013 is not that long ago, but it is. How are things in Bryan now? I mean, if you could walk us through that a little bit.
Well, after this event happened, we as an organization decided that we have to embrace this. I learned, studying some other LODDs and talking to some of the investigators, that not every department does that. And I was a little surprised, but we decided as a group that we're going to embrace this. We're going to find out what happened. We're going to try to make every effort to prevent it from ever happening here again. And that was just kind of our thoughts from the very beginning, and they still go through today. We went back and analyzed the fire. We studied the events or the investigative reports presented to us from outside agencies. And again, we just had to just sit back and just kind of look at it all and decide, what are we going to do with this? And again, everybody was on board to say, well, let's look at the changes recommended. Let's examine our own selves. We came up with additional recommendations internally, even above and beyond the other investigations given to us. And again, we just tried to embrace it. And the recommendations that were given to us, as well as our own, we just started to pursue those to make the changes necessary to address some unique situations we ran into that night, things that we thought we were prepared for, but due to the nature of the events, we realized we were not. I've been very blessed. The community we live in, the city leadership has supported us tremendously, but we just started going down that list, and We made some policy changes. We reviewed all of our policies. We did an operations committee to review everything we did. What went well that night, what didn't, what happened that we were not prepared for. And, we tried to come up with procedures if we encounter some of these unique situations again, that we're going to be better prepared this time. And it took a while, but, we were able to get through all of those recommendations and hopefully made the organization better and safer. But, it's still, even though it's been what seems like a short 5 years, we've hired a lot of people in the door now that were not here during that event. And, when you go through an event like this, it is hard to describe the effect it has on you. To read about them, to hear about them other places is very tough. But when you go through it yourself, it changes you. It really does. And, we certainly have to keep a constant effort today as those coming into the organization to try to instill in them, what that was like going through that and how committed we are to try to never prevent that from ever happening again. But as time goes by and more people leave and new ones come in, that's going to remain an ongoing, maybe even describe it as a struggle that just to keep those lessons learned and what those feelings were going through that fresh on the minds of everybody here.
Well, and Chief, we end this show. I know Kelly, I know just knowing your thoughts and feelings on it. Terry, we always end it this way, and we'll say at the end of the show, but never forgetting means never forgetting. And if we're truly going to make a difference in the future, we have to. Vinny Dunn, Deputy Chief Vinny Dunn from FDY, a legend. When I grow up, I want to be just like him. A quote I've used from him: "The only way we're going to survive the dangers of firefighting is to look at how firefighters have been injured and killed in the past, to identify what we did right, what we did wrong, what we need to change." And sometimes it's not as much. I think a lot of people forget it's not as much about being wrong as much as there are things that happen. Billy Goldfeder wrote an article that our viewers, you can look up at the Fire Rescue Archives not too long ago, and it was titled "Some LODDs Are Unavoidable." And he's talking about the one in New Jersey, guys, where the firefighter he had a hold of the senior. He had her in the back. It was a house fire, and made a grab in the back bedroom, was dragging her out to the front door, and the floor opened up, and they fell in the basement. Both of them died. And a lot of people forget when it comes to it, we're their last resort. I mean, we're and you look at operator, your driver operator Lopez searching, for a reported missing occupant, whether they were there or not. I don't know the details. It doesn't matter. If you pull up to my house and somebody said my daughter, my kid was in there, I want you to go in. I want you to, it's just one of those things that we're their last resort. I think we've kind of lost our grip a little bit on that lately. That we're so busy. I've said this before on this show, jumping out of helicopters with carabiners and other things that we don't know how to stretch hose anymore. We don't know how to search. We don't know how to vent. Back to the basics. Those things that help firefighters maneuver their ways through this stuff. But you keyed in on something about so many departments, and there are. And I mentioned it at the beginning of the show. They do nothing, and it's just such a tragedy. It's bad enough. It's horrible enough to go through a line of duty death, but to not do the right thing, to not look at it constructively, not destructively, constructively, and learn something from it, and then continue to share. We just had the anniversary not too long ago of the loss at Hackensack, New Jersey. Hackensack, New Jersey, 5 firefighters, and guys, I'll have people in class, and they don't know what I'm talking about. I'll say, "What happened in Hackensack?" And there's all kinds of lessons there that can be learned from that, and nobody knows. And I'm like, well, what happened here? What happened here? What happened here? And I think that's something we're missing. Is to make sure we cover those lessons learned when that happens. And I wanted to. Terry's going to jump in here in a second. I want to ask you one thing, Terry, real quick. Ask the chief before we move on. How are your 2 firefighters doing? Because we've got a bunch of stuff to get through here. But how are the 2 firefighters that were with the lieutenant on the RIT team doing today?
They're both doing well. Firefighter Mitch Moran is back to full active duty. He's recently gotten married, and he's on the truck, and just he's living the life of a firefighter. And that's what he wanted to do coming out of this incident. very adamant about that. And firefighter Ricky Manti, while he will not go back to full duty, he is assigned in our training division now, and he has just been a great resource for us. But one of the things he's doing right now is traveling all over the state of Texas, as well as outside of the state, telling his message, telling his story, what happened at night, what it was like to go through the burns and the treatments and what that means to him today and such. So he's staying very busy with that, and we just support him in that. He can get that message out to other firefighters. It has a big impact on them.
Making a difference. Making a difference. Go ahead, Terry, go ahead, buddy. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hey, Kelly, I wanted to touch for a little bit and understand the audience that may be listening today is kind of scattered throughout. So we're referencing specifically Texas and the state fire marshal office, but I don't think even a lot of firefighters in this state, and probably thankfully so, because sometimes I think your exposure to the state fire marshal's office is because of something catastrophic, and that's what gets them in the door. But I want to talk a little bit about the role that the state fire marshal's office serves as far as in the state for a line of duty death. And you know, there's going to be several investigations at the tail end of this. If you know, NIOSH comes in and does a report, and of course in Texas again, the state fire marshal's office is going to come in. But that was your prior job before you took that cush assignment down there in San Marcos, laying on that river all day. But talk a little bit about what the state fire marshal's office, how do they respond, and kind of walk us through that process of their investigation.
I'll give you the background when I was there and the way that it worked. It hasn't changed a whole lot today, but first of all, state legislature in Texas mandates the state fire marshal's office investigate each firefighter fatality that happens, line of duty death. And that approach is, it's going to be different, but it's going to be the same on each one of these. The deal here is we want to find the lessons learned. What can we teach the fire service? What can we take away from it to prevent it in the future? And if it's an operations related death, typically there would be a team that was put on the ground. We'd work through everything from the fire scene on, you know, the origin and cause of the fire, and then work through the building construction. But we also did several interviews. We worked with the administrators. We looked at training records. We looked at policies. We looked at procedures. And we kind of put all that information together to come up with the findings. And then based on those findings, one of the things that we did is we put together recommendations. And as you go through this and you look through over the history of all of these, and you look back even at the ones that are on the state fire marshal's office website, you keep seeing a lot of the same findings over and over. And so then what we did is we took that out, and Chief Keneally, who was the state fire marshal when I was there, was very proactive in getting this word out and trying to prevent these in the future through helping to teach those lessons learned, so that, you know, these deaths weren't in vain, and that these memories went on, and that that there was good that came out of these situations.
Oh, sorry about that. I appreciate that. Hey, Chief, I wanted to hit on something that you said earlier, because you said you all embraced, you know, you come to a point in time after your line of duty death scenario that you have to embrace it and move on. And I think Chief Lasky alluded to this. So, you know, I appreciate that approach. And, you know, although in Louisville we haven't suffered a line of duty death, we did have Andy's injury, which is as close as, to be honest with you, that I ever want to come to the situation. But, you know, to a certain degree, I kind of feel a little bit of going down that path, because I think it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, because someone has to sit down and say, I don't want to say mistakes. That's a harsh word to use. But at the end of the day, you have to analytically look at everything and ask yourself, what did we do well, but what did we do wrong? And there's always going to be something that contributes to the scenario that you're in. And Chief Lasky alluded to, there's going to be times that the line of duty death happens, and there's very little you can do about that. I mean, 9/11's a pretty good example of that. you know, the firefighters were doing exactly what they're trained and what's expected of them, and the most, you know, devastating, unfortunate thing in the world can happen. But when you say that you all embraced it, how long of a time, I guess, before your event happens, you have to go through the stages of grief, or however you get on the other side? But getting on the other side to me is that point that we say, all right, let's put all this down let's put it out on the table, and we're going to come out on the other side of this a better organization as we move forward. And what kind of time frame do you think that takes or took for y'all?
Well, I know for us, just the initial shock of it happening, again, it was just felt like a nightmare. You know, we're going to wake up from this, and it's just going to be a bad dream. And of course, that wasn't the situation. Just immediately we had family needs with the two lives that were lost, and then at the same time, we had two critically burned down in a burn center in Galveston, Texas. And, we were just frantic there for several days, just trying to work through this. Just trying to support those families, get them what they needed, being uncertain about what would happen to the two firefighters who were burned. We just had to work through all of that. And we just made the priority at that point, obviously, to take care of the families and the needs of the families as best we could. And, of course, came the memorials and the funerals, and we got through all of that. And, I would say it was shortly after that that we kind of got that done, that we immediately started looking at what happened that night. And, we were already starting to get some preliminary information back. But we started grouping together, and we started, again, forming our own investigative team and our operations committee to analyze our policies and everything. And we hit the ground running pretty quick, because the impact it had on us, again, the folks that we lost, and seeing the two laying there in the burn center just fighting for their lives, it impacts you. And there's no other way to describe it. And that's just an experience, not just myself as chief, but everybody said, we're not doing this again. We just can't. And we're going to make every effort to prevent it. And so we did not wait around long at all to get that process going. But also, too, one of the things we did very quickly after this was to meet with the families of every family who wished to attend, whether they were on the scene or not. We put everybody through CISM debriefings, and but we invited the families down one night. We rented a building and brought them down, and I just wanted to tell them, explain to them what we knew at the time. But I wanted to assure every family member throughout the organization that, the safety of their family members were still our priority. And again, just trying to cover every base and just take care of the folks here that were directly and indirectly affected by this. But then, like I said, as soon as we kind of got those things done, we hit the ground trying to figure out what happened and what we could do to prevent it.
I imagine firefighters being firefighters, they're action oriented and they're problem solvers. But I'm thinking in my head, there's got to be a little bit of therapy, I guess, is for lack of a better description. To do something, put a plan together, and let's move forward. And I would suspect that maybe, did you feel like that kind of helps you to get through the process, and that you're kind of actively out there trying to solve those problems?
Yeah, so one of the decisions we faced was what we were going to do immediately with what we knew. Of course, with every working fire, we come back and critique it and study it, and we have a process that we go through with those folks that respond to that call, and a way to take that information, the good points, the points to improve upon, and communicate them out. And we talked about it. We made the decision just to move through this one as well. We treated it like every other fire, just so we could get the information out to the rest of the department of what we knew at the time. Of course, obviously, we came back and studied it much more and read in detail and found more information to release later. But I think for the firefighters involved on scene and those who were off duty or not involved, they wanted to know what happened. So we just tried to go through what we could and went through the same process and treated it the same as any other fire initially.
Well, and that's one of those things I mentioned before, Chief, is, in the fire service, as it is in law enforcement, we don't shut down operations for a week while we, we bring in, OSHA comes in and does everything. And so, we'll get coverage right away and to help us through while people are going, through their debriefing and so on. So they're diffusing the briefings and stuff, but we have to be back out there. We've got to get back on a rig and we got to go and do our job. And I think without what you did, and again, we keep going back to it, so many places don't do it. I don't think you can recover, or you can't work your way to it, or it's like a ticking time bomb when you don't take something that happened that was so horrible and spin around into something where, look, we don't want this to happen again. I just retweeted Bill Carey from Firefighter Nation. Our good friend Bill jumped on it already, and I retweeted a little while ago the article I talked about. It's actually titled by Billy Goldfighter, "Sometimes We Must Take Risks." But we just don't shut down. We don't close the doors and say we're down. We're going to close down for a month and retool. So it's so god awful important, to make sure that we do look at this stuff. And I guess my question would be for Kelly, with investigations, and I used to talk with Steve Bass about this, and I know, those that I participated in, or the follow-ups, or the offsite, or now we're working a lot with departments, and Terry knows that we're doing this with this. Randy and Kelly is going in afterwards to help a lot of chiefs. You've been there, Chief. I mean, I'm saying it's so difficult to work your way out of that, and you don't want to be seen as the heavy, the bad guy if you're trying to make recommendations, because everybody's nerves and they're exposed, and people are worried about, instead of just saying, look, let's just get past this and move forward and try to learn from it. We try to help a lot of departments now climb out of that hole. Take the committee's recommendations and act on them, because a lot of bosses really aren't sure which way to go with it. I guess my question, if we back things up, Kelly, walk us through. You show up you show up, okay? And I try to explain this to people in class. I want them to hear it from you. We have a firefighter we've lost in a structure. State Fire Marshal's office. You walk us through your process when you get there as the investigator. I think there's a lot of people out there that, I don't want to say are fearful, but it's like, it's not a horrible thing. When you get there to try and find out what happened, like you said, Chief, guys want to know what happened. What happened? Don't hide anything. Tell us what happened. And that's the question. What happened? What happened? I used to say, I wish you reach down into a grave and pull someone out and sit down and have a talk with, say, tell me what happened. We don't know. Were you lost, or did you, just whatever. But, Kelly, walk us through, when you arrive somewhere, what's your thoughts, and what's the process?
Well, I think the first part of that process is going to be to get with the fire chief, get with his command staff or her command staff, and get a baseline of information, inform them of what the process is going to be. That after, we've had the meeting with them, there's going to kind of be two simultaneous investigations going on at the same time here. So we're going to have people who will be sitting down with the firefighters who were on the scene. I'll be interviewing them, trying to gather information to put those pieces back together, to find out what happened. And you've got a second investigation that's going on at the scene, putting together that information that comes from the interviews. Looking at not just a lot of people think the scene is just used for the origin and cause. It's not. We're looking at the tactics that were used. What can we see from the tactics? Apparatus placement. We can look at hose lines. There's a lot of different things we can begin to look at on the scene as they're also gathering interviews. So you kind of got two things that will be going on usually at the same time or very close to one another. Those interviews, one of the things that I'm very supportive of is we need to minimize the interviews. It was mentioned earlier here in the cast that, you're going to have NIOSH, you may have the State Fire Marshal's office, you may have somebody internally. If we can all work together, do that in one set of interviews, let's gather that information. Let's minimize the impact that we have.
That's a great point.
Because these people have already been through enough tragedy. We don't need to come back in and cause more tragedy or more heartache. Let's try to minimize that. Let's do one interview process. And then what we'll do is we're going to look at training records. You're going to look at, policies, procedures, And you start to put all of this together. And as you're doing this, there's got to be that constant communication back to the fire chief. And there's got to be that constant communication with their command staff or the people they've put in control. When that communication lacks with that leadership between the investigators and the leadership, I think that's why the firefighters, the fire chiefs even get frightful. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what to expect. So communication is that big piece, and putting all of those pieces together to come back and figure out what happens. We can have those findings, ultimately the recommendations, and we can go out and put these out there for lessons for the future and for the fire service that's out there today and tomorrow.
Well, and you said it. I love the fact. I love that point, that message you made, about one interview. I think that's a great point you made. Everybody on this panel today, and a lot of the people I know that are pinging me on Facebook and Twitter, have or continue to serve as incident commanders. And you said that the word that we use the word frightful, which, like I said, I if you don't know what's coming and how people do it, I've always been a big supporter of trying to explain to people, just like you did, this is what we're looking for. This isn't someone coming in that's going to point fingers and ridicule. Terry and I, Chief and Kelly, Terry and I did a show not too long ago and the title of the show was Bullies, Thugs, and Facebook Firefighters. And it just infuriates me. Our good friend, Peter Procchio at Fire Engineering on that side, and Bill Carey on Firefighter Nation do a great job weeding through the nonsense. You post a video of a fire. There was a line of duty that not too long ago, and I think the word was just out. I mean, I was talking to guys who called me from the firehouse. They just wanted to talk. I mean, they were still at the scene, and people were all over social media, with ridiculous stuff or making assumptions instead of letting the process work. And so a point that Terry and I made was, enough with the dropping the F-bomb that you see people do, this just a ridiculous stuff, is let the process work. The word's going to get out there. We're going to know what happened. Chief, we talked about, I can't thank you enough for what you do and how progressive just truly you are as a chief, let alone what happened with that incident. It'll be out there. And I think people are worried. That's why I think it's great that, we can talk about it here, Kelly, about what you do and what you're looking for and so on and so forth. I guess my next question would be, Chief, how do you getting the word out's one thing, but and I just had a guy just text me, and I won't get into all the message. A great message about, I've always said, if you've been an incident commander and you've sent firefighters into a burning building and smoke conditions or conditions haven't changed for the positive, if you don't get that pit in your stomach, if you don't get that, it doesn't mean you're weak. I think it means it means you haven't lost your edge. A little nervousness, a little uneasiness keeps you sharp. It keeps you watching, right? That feeling you get. I know when I stood in the driveway in Flower Mountain when Captain John Wright and his firefighter were trapped on the second floor and we couldn't get them on the radio, I know how I felt. And I said, we just lost 2 firefighters, and it's a miracle that John made it out. We've had him on the show and he's talked about it. Chief, how do you move? I mean, I'm just saying, how do you move forward from that? 2 things. How do you deliver your message that you've been so gracious with doing about what happened there? And then, as a boss, what would you say to any chief officer, anybody's an incident commander about, God, I hate saying it when it comes to a lot of duty, but getting back on the horse, getting back on the bicycle, we still got to go back to work. You still have to run a fire without second guessing yourself. Because I know some guys have gotten so over the top safety wise, they actually endanger their guys because they're so worried. You know what I'm saying? How did you get past that with you and your staff, your BCs and everybody else? What did you work towards with that?
Well, I think our success came from just how we embraced it again, going back to, trying to figure out what happened that night and what changes have we done to prevent that from happening. And again, we tried to implement those changes as quick as feasible, and just over a period of time, again, acknowledging what we did well that night, which was very many things, and then realizing and focusing on, things we could have done better and trying to address those issues. And, you got to reiterate, it is a dangerous job. But we've got to do everything we can on that fire ground to make sure, we don't allow something like this to happen. And I think the message was just, we've got to keep moving forward. As you said, Chief, we don't have any other choice. The alarms continue to go off. We're going to continue to respond. And to be honest, for the first couple of months after this event, when the box alarm tone would drop, you could just see a look on people's faces, a little bit uneasy that wasn't there before. But again, just trying to communicate the message out of what happened that night, and again, reinforce the changes we've made, allowing people to have buy-in to those changes and having a voice in it, I think helped carry us a long way, where they were able to move on and to this day still continue moving forward. And those changes that we implemented, that they still adhere to them every day, and I'm proud of them for that. And it just seemed to become part of who we are, and that has certainly helped us continue moving forward.
Hey, Kelly, you were talking a minute ago, and it. So if you've never been in a situation where you investigate fires or an offense, but I kind of wanted to touch base with you just a second, because I've read the manual, or the kind of the playbook for line of duty death, and then what the state fire marshal does. But and speaking to the interview part, but the other component of this, and I wanted to touch on it because I think it's very important for anyone who's on a fire ground that suffers a catastrophic injury or a line of duty death, especially. Every single thing matters. Gear, face piece, the SCBA they were wearing, the radio, the obviously the tactics that were employed, the lines, the hose placement. Every single thing is a piece of evidence that you all are going to come in and evaluate, and not from a punitive standpoint, not from a standpoint of trying to pick apart, but every single thing matters. And I only say that because there are times where I've investigated something to where, in a third interview, or 2 weeks later, someone mentions something, and then you kind of give that head snap and go, well, why didn't you tell me that? Well, I didn't think it was important. But getting back to on the fire ground, it's so dynamic, and there's so much involved in everything that fire department does when it comes up to the the point of fighting a structure fire. But every single thing matters, and it's important that we protect the integrity of all that we keep it in as pristine and as original condition and such and so forth, that when you all come in and do that analysis, that you have the opportunity to look at everything as close to the scenario as possible. And I just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
I think it's important when we've had a line of duty death that the scene be just secured, the scene be kept as it was. No need to remove any of the equipment, pieces of equipment. We can go down to the face piece itself, and through the individual pieces that we may find, or the parts of the face piece, that can begin to tell us information as well. So every little detail matters. One of the recommendations that we used to make, and is still made today, is that if you have a line of duty death on that scene, just lock the scene down, wait for the investigators to get there, take very good pictures, do very good documentation, don't disturb anything. And I think that's another piece where, when the investigators come in to look at that line of duty death, they need to be forming a partnership with the local fire investigator, the local fire marshal as well. That's an important piece to understand the department, the tactics, what was seen at the time of the event. Was anything moved? Was anything recovered? Where's the gear? Where is the SCBA? Where is the radio? Where are all those small pieces that could have been a key factor that led to the circumstances surrounding that death? So best advice is call immediately for help. Lock the scene down. Don't move the trucks. Don't disconnect the hoses. Don't put a shovel into the scene. Don't walk through the scene to see what you can find. Just leave it as is and let those investigators come in and work with you to go through this process.
And again, not to be fearful, not to be. It's not like
Right.
Don't It's not like people are afraid about covering things. It's about the only way. And if we all can remember, we changed our pass devices because we realized that they weren't. We would talk about how they failed in particular fires, and they weren't working. And then we realized, well, you know what, they weren't able to take heat very well. And I'm like, well, that's great. We had to change our pass devices. We even changed, if you remember originally, where we had them because you could fall on or end up in the water submerged and they didn't work. So we had to put them on the air pack in a place. I mean, all these things, if you think about everything that's changed, and I'm not trying to sound too dramatic here. I'm being very blunt and honest, Chief, about what you've done and Kelly, what you've done. We talk, everybody, the shows people do about making grabs or dragging civilians out and all that stuff is all great. But you guys are making grabs. Kelly, you've made grabs, and Chief, you've made grabs of firefighters just by sharing and by an investigator coming in and doing their job, and a chief being proactive and sharing what they learned and taking the I'm going to tell you, I don't want to throw the department out there. There's two different instances when it comes to, and Chief, you said about talking and working with the families, and Kelly getting out there and locking things down right away. I guess my question, I want to spin this around to Chief about getting a hold of families, especially when you've got multiples. There was a large metro department that had a couple fatalities, and one of the widows found out on Facebook. And years ago, I know when I was a chief in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho in the 90s, one of the things I was passionate about was our death and serious injury notification form, our process. Terry, you're very well aware of it because I know that's what you use in Louisville and Denton County, is everybody filling out. And I've told people before, and I've had to do it. If you've never had to drive through a shopping mall looking for a fire department sticker on a vehicle, hoping that you can get PD to run a plate for you, so you could figure out if the person's widow or family's there, so you can try and find them, because you don't have any information. You don't have cell phones. Just getting to people, especially nowadays, before the word gets out there in the media or the social media. There's one department, and I'll get to this with you in a second, Chief, that I was telling Terry this on the phone. They had multiple line of duty deaths, and one of the widows, a fellow firefighter, called her and said, "Look, they just announced all the names. He wasn't there. He must be okay because he wasn't one of the ones they mentioned." And they had family and friends. Everybody was over there waiting to hear the bad news, and it turned into more or less a celebration that he was okay. And they showed up at the house to make the notification, and somewhere along the line, she said, "Did you hear? Did you hear?" She came outside. She goes, "He's okay." And they nodded and said, "No." And I guess, Chief, it wasn't dealing with not just one, but two, and then guys that were seriously injured, to be able to get a hold of the family and have people, we're talking multiple families and loved ones. I guess my question, what advice would you give to other folks in the fire service from lessons learned, or what worked or what didn't work? Because I know when I did it once a long time ago, nothing went right. Nothing we tried went right. And I remember getting in the car and driving. I get with the captain who actually ran a fire, and 4 hours later, we were like, I don't know where we were. We had to turn around. Nothing went well. What did you do? And if you could share some of those lessons with some of the folks out there, because it's one thing to go through it. Oh my God. And while you're going through it, you got to deal with that too. I mean, just help us out with that one.
Well, it's very interesting. That was such a process that night. For many years, we have been doing the LODD packets, requiring every employee to fill one out, update them annually, kept them under lock and key. We just kind of followed, recommended guidelines. At the time of our event, by the time we needed those, we sent an administrative assistant down to retrieve 4 packets, the 2 that in the end were deceased and 2 critically burned. And they were very helpful. There were numbers in there. We were making calls around 1 o'clock in the morning, between midnight and 1. We were able to reach some we did not get through to, got voicemails, etc. One spouse was traveling. One of the firefighters injured, just had a girlfriend locally. We were able to find her. One of the spouses lived in an adjacent county and was not answering the phone at all. And we ended up getting law enforcement in that county to go to her house and bang on the door and deliver her. And we intercepted her on the way to Bryan. I did to give her a face-to-face. But, it was a challenge that night. And going back to social media, I tell a lot of people today, if that would have been noon to 1 p.m. trying to make these notifications, I don't think we can get ahead of it. I don't think we could have. I mean, there's too many people out there who would know who it was, would get the word out, and be all over Facebook or other forums. And, I don't really know if we can still get ahead of it today. And the only reason I think we did that time was due to the time of night that we were trying to make these notifications. One interesting thing that happened that night was on the way to meet the one spouse, I was escorted by law enforcement, again, trying to intercept her on the way down to Bryan. I received an email from a CNN reporter in the middle of the night, and my email address was not on our website at the time. How this person got it, I still don't know, but they were requesting an interview. And of course I ignored it, but it was just amazing how fast that word got out in the middle of the night and them reaching out to me, trying to find me.
Well, and I think in the absence of having the packets that you had, nowadays, we're able through the MCTs to access computers and things and files that are, encrypted and protected, but so many places still don't have anything ready. It's like people don't want to do a will, right. They don't want to fill out the packet. And my article last month in Fire Rescue in June, the title article was, they changed it around. It was basically about the most dangerous words in the fire service. And a lot of people want to throw that because we've always done it, that way. I don't believe that. There's a lot of things we've always done that just work out fine. Stop doing stupid stuff is what they should be looking for. The phrase that I think are the most dangerous words in the fire service world is, we never thought it would happen here. And I can't tell you, right, how many times, I'm sure, Kelly, in your investigations and Chief, in your travels, how many times people have come up to you and said, how did you, we're so sorry, we had the same thing happen back in 1982 or 1995 or 2000, whatever. And those words, they're kind of haunting. We never thought it would happen here. And I don't care how big, we had a fatality in Teague, Texas. And I've said that before, a good young man we lost in Teague, Texas, at a smaller department is gone the same way Chief Fahey was in New York City. They don't have two different memorials in Emmitsburg. They have one. It doesn't say big and small department, volunteer career. It says, killed in the line of duty. And, so I guess that's my point is to any of our listeners, our viewers out there, if you will, if you don't have a process in place, and we'll give you some information at the end, there's some resources you can get a hold of. You need to get that done. Terry, you had somebody threw a question out there at Twitter, right?
Yeah, and just I'll read the question that was posted here. But before I forget, I did want to ask Chief McGregor, because I've heard you speak to this before, but I do want to give you the opportunity to kind of brag. But you had tremendous support from your city administration, and I know you've spoke to that before. And I just wanted to kind of ask you about that and how critical having the just absolute 100% support, as it should be, but unfortunately maybe that's not the case everywhere across the country. But you speak to a little bit about the relationship between you, the fire department, and your city administrators during that time and now.
Certainly, and I tell you, as a fire chief, very, very blessed that support. We're a close-knit community, just a great group of people here, like many places. But when things unfolded that night, I immediately started making some phone calls to the city manager, who in turn made some calls. And literally, we had the city manager, city secretary, council members, people literally rushing to the hospital. gathering up in a room to start making plans or trying to figure out what needed to happen. And all they kept telling me was, just tell us what you need. Just tell us what you need. And they immediately stepped up for the families. As we started getting down to the burn center the next day, checking on the other, well, 3 of them were down there. They immediately just started covering expenses for all the families, providing food, just anything that was needed. Our city staff stepped up and provided. But even beyond, as we started implementing changes, a lot of these things we did took a lot of financial backing. And each time I went to the city manager, he said, we need to do whatever we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen. And we spent a lot of money upgrading equipment, adding staffing. One of the things, the city council passed a resolution shortly after the fire in July of that year about moving all fire companies to 4 firefighter staffing. And they did a 10-year resolution along with adding a full-time battalion chief's aide. And I'm happy to report all of that is done today in half the time. And it makes a big difference. And it's hard for me to imagine not having that support, to be honest. But what we went through, having that support just from literally the early hours on all the way through the changes and still through today is tremendous. And I could not be more proud of our city and our city leaders.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, we had a post on Twitter from Bill Carey, and so he raises an interesting question, and that is, to knowledge, there hasn't been an LODD where the victim is wearing a helmet camera or some of the recording devices that are out there now, and of course those are gaining in popularity. But his question centers around: is that something that would you support releasing that to the public? And I'm curious to know, Kelly, what your thoughts are on that. I'll be honest with you, from my standpoint, I would do anything in my power if it meant helping someone in the future. And I think that's ultimately what this is all about. And we certainly release 911 tapes, we release radio transcripts. And if you're looking at the footage or listening to it because it's entertaining to you, then God help you, you're sick. But getting back, I kind of look at it, and my first gut reaction is that's a terrible thing to kind of witness or to go back and relive, if you will. But then at the same time, I think to myself, this whole process is about learning and making adjustments and changes, as you just alluded to, Chief McGregor, and to help the next person, the next firefighter, and to try to mitigate this and eliminate this. And I was wondering what your thoughts were. Kelly, I'll start with you.
My thought on it is this, that in the beginning, I think that video needs to be held. We need to look at it from a standpoint on how's it going to relate to the investigation. After that, and after ultimately the chief administrator of that department has viewed it and made a decision, I don't think it's the investigator's place to ever release that to the public, but it should be for the department to do. I think that's a decision that goes to that fire chief. And I will tell you that there is value in it. I had a good friend who was shot and killed in the line of duty and on law enforcement side, and that video is out all over the place and used in training academies and available to the public. And I will tell you, it makes an impact. It lets you see the lessons learned and, what mistakes, can I prevent from making in the future so that, maybe you can go home at the end of the day. So I do think that there's value in that. And but that is a decision that that department's chief administrator would need to make based on where they stand with it and what their policies and procedures are.
Well, and I think it's a great point, and I'm glad Bill threw it out there. I think everybody mentioned here. I think it's a matter of timing, like you said. You look at law enforcement, body cams now, everything going on dash. I mean, they just the shootout. I believe in Vegas, Terry, where we were talking about that one through the windshield, and just some of the. I think once it's been vetted, once it's been looked at, once there's a point, like Terry said, if there's a lesson that can be learned, it's not about glorifying. I think we get way too into that nowadays. I'm a big one. I'm a huge supporter of honor guards, the pipes and drums, is sending people off the right way. We as much as we need to pay tribute to someone, show how much we love them, and when we've lost them, I think we need to focus more on it not happening again. I was just going to ask you, we're getting close on time. We can go a few minutes over. Sometimes we do, but I guess my question would be for both Chief and for Kelly. Trends. We said this before. Is there anything that just jumps out when it comes to trends regarding line of duty that's as a whole? We talked about the heart attack and stress thing. Like I said, Bill Carey's doing a great job of Firefighter Nation, working all the numbers and throwing them out there all the time. Billy Goldfeder does a great job at firefighterclosecalls.com. Anything that jumps out, in the way of trends that you've seen. Let's talk structural. I'll narrow it down. Structural that you've seen, either one of you in your career.
To what point are you talking structural, Chief?
Structural fires inside, stuff, anything trending wise. We talked about, we can lump things into flashover, we can lump things into being disoriented and so on and so forth, run out of air. But, is there anything that just jumps out? And I guess I'm just throwing it out there. If, anything in particular, maybe there's not one thing, maybe it's a bunch of things.
I'm going to go with, if we look back at some of the ones I was involved in, and I'm not going to mention the agencies, but there was an overwhelming theme on maybe, a better understanding of building construction, better understanding of fire dynamics, fire spread, fire growth, and being able to put those together either as a firefighter that's inside that structure or as the IC on the outside, to be able to continually assess that fire development, fire growth, and how is the given building construction and what the fire is doing and what we're seeing, what we're getting from reports on the inside, how does that affect the decisions that need to be made? And I can think back just right now, 3 or 4 of them where those were key factors and findings that were put into the report was that ability to understand building construction, fire spread, and recognize those changes.
And I think I would agree with that. Spot on. And we've seen changes in building construction over the last few decades, and it's not to the firefighters' advantage. Fire dynamics continue to change again, not in favor of the firefighter. So I think we see a lot of that. Some of that affected us, but I definitely agree that seems to be very common when you're looking at some of these operational LODDs.
Well, and Terry, how many times have we talked about it? I say it in all my classes I teach. The 3 most important topics you teach a brand new firefighter is our history, why we exist, why we're here, why the fire service exists, what we're here really, because it's not what you see on TV, it's not what you learn in the academy, it's not what you read in a book, why we truly exist. But to be one of my absolute true mentors, I adore him, Jack McCaslin, said, in order to be a good firefighter, you have to understand building construction fire behavior. You have to understand how the buildings react to the fire with the building. And we don't do that. You're exactly right. We don't study our enemy. We want to get to, like I said, we want to jump out of helicopters or carabiners, do all the fun stuff. But if you don't have even the basics down when it comes to fire behavior and building construction, and the building is the enemy, we're just gonna see this happen over and over and over again. So those great message, great message. Terry, we're getting close here, buddy. Guys, we do this every show with our guests. We get towards the end here before we get to your contact information, and when we get done, hang on there with us. Don't sign off. When we go off the air, we can chat a little bit, but. Let's start with Kelly. Kelly, our fire marshal from San Marcos, investigator all those years, among other things, the State Fire Marshal's Office of Texas. Kelly, what would be your advice? I'll take you individually. Where your advice to the firefighters, company officers, and even some of the chiefs out there when it comes to preventing. Let's talk about preventing line of duty deaths. What advice?
I would say on the prevention, and I have a note sitting here next to me on prevention and how do we prevent these deaths. It's got to be through training. It's got to be through continual development. It's got to be from learning from the past and not letting those before us that have gone die in vain. And back to what we just talked about, know your building construction, know your fire behavior, know your fire dynamics, how to assess it, and teach that to the next generation that's coming up behind us, and make sure that we continue to spread that word. I think that knowledge and that training is going to be a key to future prevention of line of duty deaths.
Outstanding. Chief, your advice to the fire service as a whole, but especially to the bosses out there, the chiefs out there, what advice would you give them?
Well, again, I just think, we've got to recognize the changes that continually occur in the fire service. And I think we need to be ahead of those changes as best we can, adapt as best we can. But more than anything, we've just got to ensure our folks have the right tools, the right resources, and provide leadership. With fires trending down, it's critical, especially at the shift commander and company officer level, that experience is passed down. There's just doesn't seem to be as many fires as there used to be, and that's a good thing. But also, too, again, nothing replaces that hands-on experience. And I think maybe just a lot of conversations about what has gone well, what didn't, in fires in the past, and just keep those lines of communication open and continually talk about those things and try our best not to become complacent.
Outstanding. Well, we said at the beginning, we before we went on the air, we thank you guys for coming on with us today. And everybody's busy. I know both of you are very busy with what you got going on in life in general, let alone the fire service. But to take time out to spend with us and our viewers, we've had some great people. We've had a ton of people listening, watching. Our good friends of the South Carolina State Firefighter Association. I just retweeted their message. They're another state that's very proactive. Their state's extremely proactive. And they've got a great program there for the departments and for the families and for the firefighters. Their last program, if you will, folks. So if you're looking, go to my Twitter account or go to the South Carolina State Firefighter Association for information. There are some great resources out there. The Texas Fire Chiefs Association is another great resource. The Texas State Fire Marshal is another great resource. NIOSH. We talked about firefighter close calls with Billy Gofetter. Obviously, Fire Engineering and Firefighter Nation, our good friend Bill Carey taking care of business for us, and Pete throwing things out there. Terry, before we take it home here, I just wanted to thank you guys again. I'll say it again. You're making grabs when it comes to firefighters. You're keeping them alive. Kelly, what you've done through your investigations and findings, getting the word out, the integrity it takes to do what you do, to be a person of character, to actually get the word out there afterwards, it is absolutely incredible. And I both of you, Chief, I know you've been out there yourself in your department, and I can't even begin to think of how many lives. I can't even imagine how many lives you both have touched already, just with what you've done. And if that's all you do, if you both went golfing tomorrow and said that's it, you've done an incredible job. So God bless you and thank you. I'm gonna let Terry take things home.
Oh, thanks, Chief. And again, I'll say extend my thanks to both of you as well for coming on with us today. And Chief, that's an excellent point, is that, I throw out that whole notion sometimes that it's hard to measure what never happens. And, that is fire prevention in a nutshell, because, I think it was Mark Lee and Garland that tweeted or texted one day, and he said, I got, I'm paying 200 guys to fight fire, and I pay 5 guys to prevent them. And he said, sometimes it's a little bit askew, it seems. And I think there's a lot of truth to what Chief is saying, and just getting out there and talking about this stuff and creating a platform to educate people, to help people, so that those who come behind us hopefully never have to suffer through something like this. But at the same time, you're always helping the next guy be better. So anyway, I do appreciate that a lot. Hey, if somebody wanted to reach out, Kelly, if anybody had any questions, they want to talk to you specifically, what's a good contact information for you?
I can be reached at K Kistner, KKISTNER at sanmarcostx.gov. So the email would be the best reach.
And if you're looking for a great place to vacation, I'm telling you, talk to them.
That's right. And Chief McGregor, how about if somebody wanted to reach out to you, if they had some questions for you, what's a good way to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Email as well. R. McGregor, RMCGREGOR at BRYANTX.gov.
Great. I appreciate that. I can be reached at tmcgrath at cityoflouisville.com. Chief can be reached at 5alarmleadership@gmail.com. You can reach out on Twitter and Facebook, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions for our guests or for Chief or myself. Don't hesitate to be in touch with us. Our next show, Chief, is going to be August 15th.
That's it.
I guess that'll be, I'm sure today it's like 102, and I'm sure at August 15th it'll be 101 or 103, I'm certain. Anyway, you can find Humpday Hangouts. Fire Engineering always has this show every Wednesday, 12 o'clock Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and there's a lot of great guests, a lot of great hosts, a lot of great topics. So it's only an hour of your time. I encourage you to join in and watch each and every week. And we wouldn't close the show without reminding you to keep the men and women serving armed forces in your thoughts and prayers, and never forgetting means never forgetting. Thank you all, and God bless.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.